Welcome to The Breakdown. I'm Jamie Strachan. After going public on social media with allegations she was sexually assaulted by a senior Chinese government official, tennis player Peng Shuai is now saying it never happened. In a highly controlled interview with a French newspaper, she called the allegations an enormous misunderstanding. Despite her retraction, many, including the head of the Women's Tennis Association, say they still have doubts about her well-being.
New comments raising more questions around Chinese tennis star Peng Shuai, who re-emerged this weekend at a ski event in Shanghai.
The Chinese tennis star Peng Shuai appears to have retracted an accusation of sexual assault she made against a former Chinese vice premier.
The Chinese tennis star who dropped out of sight after accusing a top Chinese official of pressuring her into sex. She has emerged just a short time ago at the Beijing Olympics.
For more on this, we're joined by Minky Warden, Director of Global Initiatives for Human Rights Watch. We have reached her in New York. Minky, Peng Shuai is not competing in these Olympics, but she has become a central figure here, including appearances at multiple events. Why is that?
Well, as you'll remember, on November 2, Peng Shuai wrote on a Chinese social media site that a top Chinese government leader, Zhang Gaoli, had forced her into having a sexual relationship with him. And Zhang Gaoli is not just any Chinese official. He was, for a time, the top official in charge of the Beijing Winter Olympics until his retirement. But, this is really China's Me Too, one of China's Me Too movements. Although Peng is one of China's best known athletes, she completely disappeared from sight for weeks. Her statement about sexual assault was scrubbed from the internet, and then she reappeared in public in videos released by the state-run media. She has since disappearing. For a while, the IOC was the only organization that was in touch with her, but it was in touch with her under circumstances that are completely unknown.
The IOC was one of the few organizations to actually speak with her since she went public with these allegations. She had dinner with IOC President Thomas Bach this weekend. What role has the IOC played in rewriting this story and helping the Chinese assuage concern about her well-being?
First of all, the International Olympic Committee essentially gave a proof of life, right? No one had been able to reach Peng Shuai. The WTA, which has taken an incredibly principled and correct position, standing alongside its athlete, has said, listen, we don't trust that the walk back of these sexual assault complaints is true. We haven't been able to make contact with her. And I think the WTA is behaving in a way that is incredibly correct and principled, which is to say, they know that the Chinese government forces confessions. They know that the Chinese government may be putting Peng Shuai under duress. And the International Olympic Committee, on the other hand, is playing a role of helping the Chinese government say she's A-OK. And it's impossible to know if Peng Shuai is in any position to reject the IOC's advances. She is reported to have had dinner at the Olympic Club in China with Thomas Bach and Chinese Olympic Committee officials. But there's no way of knowing if she was in a position to reject this dinner invitation or if she wanted a different encounter with the IOC, such as safely outside of China.
What role should the IOC play? Should they be the ones pushing for or leading an inquiry into what happened?
The Olympic system has a problem with sexual abuse, and I'm pretty sure that they didn't want this conversation to be central to the Olympics. But once Peng Shuai, an athlete and a three-time Olympian, brought these charges forward, it's really the responsibility of the IOC is to try their best to figure out what she wants, but actually not by doing so through the Chinese government, which may be repressing her.
At the same time, the IOC has seemingly bent over backward to avoid actually saying her name or addressing her well-being or the need to examine her allegations more closely. Why is that?
Athletes don't sacrifice their rights when they play sports. They don't sacrifice their rights when they go to the Olympics. That means the right to free speech. And Peng Shuai was exercising her right to free speech. Unfortunately, she was doing it in a country, China, that represses free speech. It represses Me Too claims. It represses sexual harassment revelations because it's embarrassing.
What role should the IOC play here, Minky? Should they be pushing for or leading an inquiry into what actually happened?
The IOC's partner is the Chinese Olympic Committee, which may be repressing her. So the IOC is absolutely has a conflict of interest here. Thomas Bach has been pictured with Zhang Gaoli, her alleged abuser. So the IOC is the last organization that should be investigating this. And the IOC and the world has no way of knowing what surveillance, coercion, or duress is being applied to Peng Shuai, or what she would ask for if she lived in a country where the voices of women are not systematically silenced.
As we mentioned, Minky, she did do the interview this week with the French newspaper L'Equipe, her first sit-down with a Western outlet. What were your impressions of the interview?
A number of photos have surfaced from that, including one photo that caught my eye was where she is looking at the camera with the city behind her. But in a round mirror, you can see Chinese state security officials in there present at the interview. And, Peng Shuai may or may not be saying what she actually thinks. We don't know. And news organizations really should no longer interview her at all. They cannot ask her how she is feeling when she can't speak freely. Before that interview, all previous statements by her were through Chinese state-run media. And that's part of why the world doubts her walkback of her sexual assault claims.
Do you think that Peng Shuai is actually speaking freely and doing any of this by her own choice?
There's no way of knowing. The repression in China since President Xi Jinping took over in 2012 is so extreme that there is literally no way of knowing. And if you think about it, she's a three-time Olympian, one of China's best-known athletes, and yet we simply don't know whether she can speak freely or not. We don't know what she wants, and in those circumstances, the best thing is actually to leave her alone.
Minky, there's lots of different sides that have emerged to this story. What do you think actually happened here?
There are very few reporting systems. It looks like she may have just used Chinese social media, Weibo, to file her complaint because there may have been no other options available to her. But I think the rule from here on out is basically don't ask a person how she is feeling when you know she can't speak freely.
What impact do you think this story will have after these Olympics are over?
I think the Olympic movement has to care about Peng Shuai. They have to care about Simone Biles. They have to care about the 17-year-olds I interviewed in Mali who were extorted for sex in order to have a place on the women's national basketball team. These are real people whose lives are completely upended by sexual abuse and harassment. And the interesting thing about the Olympic system is that it says in all of the statutes, it says there's zero tolerance for sexual abuse. But then the deeper you dig in, you realize that those are just words on paper.
You can catch the breakdown every night at 8 p.m. on CBC Sports' YouTube channel. You can take us with you on the CBC Sports app or watch us anytime on cbc.ca/sports. For CBC Sports, I'm Jamie Strachan.